A man is running through a forest at night, and he has been running in one form or another for weeks. He is not a soldier. He is not a nobleman. By most accounts of this tradition, he is a monk, and he is carrying something more dangerous in its own way than any weapon. He is carrying a story. One he is not sure anyone will believe. One he is not sure he wants to be believed, because believing it means it actually happened. We don't know his real name with confidence. History, when it remembers him at all, calls him Brother Michael, a name attached to an account more than a fully verified person. What we do know, with genuine documentary confidence, is this. Sometime around 1460, an account, his account, or one very much like it, reached a German poet and Meistersinger named Michael Beheim. And Beheim turned it into an epic poem. Thousands of lines, performed, likely, at royal courts. One of the earliest substantial written portraits of the man history would remember as Vlad the Impaler. This channel has already told you about the printed pamphlets that turned Vlad into a monster to cover a king's broken promise. What this channel hasn't told you is where some of that raw material may have actually come from. Not a printing press, not a political calculation. A single traumatized man walking out of Wallachia, carrying a story in his chest like a wound. This is the true, documented history of Michael Beheim's poem, dramatized in places because the record is thin exactly where it matters most, and the uncomfortable question sitting underneath it. How much of what the world believes about Dracula started with one frightened witness, and how much of that witness can we actually trust? Let's be clear about the ground we're standing on before we walk any further into it. The specific scene I'm about to describe, a monk fleeing at night, exhausted, terrified, is dramatization. Reasonable, built around a documented historical tradition, but dramatization. Nobody alive has his diary. Nobody has a verified date for when he crossed which border. What we have is the outcome, a testimony associated with his name or something like it that reached German lands and reached Beheim specifically. With that said, here is the scene as historians studying this period generally reconstruct the shape of it. Wallachia, sometime in the late 1450s or early 1460s. A monastery, we don't know precisely which one, sits in territory increasingly caught between Vlad's rule and the violence of his methods against anyone he judged disloyal, dishonest, or simply inconvenient to his authority. A monk, according to the tradition, witnesses something, or witnesses several somethings over time. This channel has already documented plenty of real, verified brutality from this exact period. The Forest of Stakes, the Brashov raids, the Easter feast. A monastery near any of that violence would have had no shortage of horror to actually see firsthand. What pushes him to leave, genuinely leave, cross into foreign territory, seek out someone willing to listen, isn't fully documented. But the pattern of what happens next is, he ends up eventually somewhere in German-speaking lands, telling his story to whoever will hear it. Picture the physical reality of that journey for a moment, because it's easy to skip past. No safe roads in this era for anyone, let alone a single traveling monk carrying nothing but an account that could get him killed if the wrong person decided he was lying, or worse, decided he was telling the truth and needed silencing. Weeks of walking, uncertain welcome at every monastery door he reached, and somewhere at the end of that road, a story that was about to outlive him by more than 5 centuries. Here's where the story becomes genuinely documented again, because Michael Beheim himself is not a mystery. Beheim was a real, working Meistersinger, a professional poet and performer, the kind of figure who made a living traveling between German courts, composing verse for whichever noble patron would pay for it. Sometime around 1463, he composed an extensive poem about Vlad, often referred to by scholars simply as his Dracula poem, running to well over 1,000 lines. Beheim himself, in material associated with his work, indicates he drew on testimony from someone connected to the region, an account from someone who claimed direct or close knowledge of events in Wallachia. This is the thread that connects back to our monk, or someone very much like him. What did that testimony actually describe? Cruelty, overwhelmingly. Methods of execution, punishments, a portrait of a ruler governing almost entirely through terror. Much of it aligns, in broad strokes, with things this channel has already covered as documented history. The impalements, the scale of violence, the calculated cruelty as political strategy. But aligns in broad strokes is doing real work in that sentence, and it's worth sitting with why. A traumatized witness, recounting violence from memory, under unknown emotional and physical strain, to a poet who then shapes that account into verse designed to entertain and horrify a noble audience. That's several layers of retelling between the original event and the version that reaches us. Trauma doesn't transmit cleanly, neither does poetry, and this account was about to pass through both. Imagine for a moment sitting across from a court poet describing the worst things you've ever seen while he's already composing the rhyme scheme in his head. That's not a neutral transmission of fact. That's a collaboration, whether either man intended it that way or not, between a witness's genuine trauma and a performer's genuine need to hold an audience's attention. Beheim's poem didn't stay quiet. That's documented fact, not speculation. It circulated through German courts in manuscript form, performed and re-performed, in an era when courtly entertainment and political messaging were often the same activity wearing different clothes. A vivid, horrifying portrait of a foreign ruler was, conveniently, exactly the kind of material German-speaking courts were receptive to. Vlad was foreign, Orthodox rather than Catholic in a religiously tense era, and increasingly useful as a cautionary figure, regardless of how accurately any given verse actually described him. Here's the connection this channel hasn't drawn before, and it matters. The printed pamphlets covered in this channel's 4th episode, the ones King Matthias Corvinus is widely believed to have used to justify imprisoning his own ally, didn't emerge from nothing. They emerged into a cultural environment where a horrifying portrait of Vlad already existed, already circulating, already primed an audience to believe worse. Beheim's poem may not be the single origin of the printed monster myth, but it's very likely part of the soil that myth grew in. A traumatized monk's testimony, filtered through a court poet's verse, may have quietly prepared German-speaking Europe to accept exactly the kind of exaggerated pamphlets a desperate king would need less than 2 decades later. One witness, one poem, one king's political convenience, arriving right on schedule to make use of groundwork he likely never even realized had already been laid.
So here's the uncomfortable question this episode actually has to sit with, and it doesn't have a clean answer. Was the monk's testimony accurate? Some of what fed into Beheim's poem plausibly describes real, documented events. This channel has independently verified plenty of the brutality involved, from sources with no connection to Beheim at all. But some of it is accurate isn't the same as all of it is accurate. And separating the two, 5.5 centuries later, through the additional distortion of poetic performance, is genuinely difficult. Trauma can produce vivid, real, unembellished memory. It can also produce exaggeration, conflation of separate events into one, or details that shift with each retelling. Not through dishonesty, but through the simple, well-documented way memory works under extreme stress. Add to that a professional poet's incentive to make the material more compelling, more shocking, more worth the audience's attention and the patron's payment, and you have a testimony that may be simultaneously genuine and unreliable, honest and exaggerated at the very same time. That's not a contradiction historians can simply resolve by picking a side. It's the actual, uncomfortable texture of how a single human account, filtered through fear and performance, can become the foundation stones of a legend that outlives everyone involved in creating it. Somewhere in that chain, witness, poet, court, printer, king, and eventually, 4 centuries later, a novelist who'd never once been to Wallachia, the actual man got smaller and the myth got larger, one retelling at a time. So let's end where this whole episode has been quietly circling. A monk, whose real name we can't confirm, may have carried a genuine trauma out of Wallachia and into the historical record, centuries before anyone would think to ask whether his testimony deserved the same scrutiny as any other piece of evidence. He is, in a very real sense, one of the first voices that ever spoke for the version of Vlad most of the world still believes in. Not Vlad's voice, not a chronicler's careful, dated record, a frightened man's memory, shaped by suffering, reshaped again by a poet's craft, released into the world without his name attached firmly enough for anyone to ever properly credit or properly question him. Maybe that's the real, uncomfortable through line of this entire channel, 10 episodes in. Vlad the Impaler's reputation was never built by one force alone. Not just his own brutal choices, not just a king's political convenience, not just a printing press. It was built, one layer at a time, by real people. A traumatized witness, a working poet, a desperate monarch, an Irish novelist centuries later, each adding their own retelling to a story that stopped being fully anyone's a very long time ago. Every week, this channel goes back into the true history behind the legend the world calls Dracula. The forest that made an empire retreat. The grave still debated centuries later. The feast that became a reckoning. The ally who manufactured a monster. And now, quite possibly, the frightened monk whose testimony gave that ally the raw material to work with in the first place. Subscribe if you want to keep asking whose voice you're actually hearing every time this story gets told again. We'll see you in the next Chronicle.